Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a really interesting report called Accelerating Europe.
Okay.
You've probably heard the chatter is Europe falling behind,
Yeah.
the global tech race.
Yeah.
Well, this report from dealroom.co, which is a platform that's used by like Google and McKinsey,
Yeah.
digs into that very question.
Oh. Wow.
It's kind of like our roadmap for understanding if Europe can really become a tech powerhouse.
Well, and what I think is really fascinating about this report is that it doesn't just throw around doom and gloom.
Right.
It actually takes a really hard look at the data and challenges some of those, those Euro doomer narratives we see online all the time.
Right. Those memes about Europe being a tech backwater.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen those floating around.
Yeah.
But this report argues that, things might be more nuanced than that.
Right.
Like, for example, it breaks down the GDP gap between the U.S. and the EU, which has grown quite a bit since 2008.
Yeah.
But what surprised me was that only 14% of that difference is actually due to productivity.
Yeah, that's a key point, I think, because if you just glance at the headlines, you might think that Europeans are just way less productive.
Right.
But the reality is that factors like currency fluctuations and the U.S. shale boom
Right.
have had a really big impact on that gap.
Okay, hold on. So for those of us who don't speak finance,
Yeah.
what exactly does that mean?
Sure.
Is it like comparing apples and oranges if you don't factor in things like cost of living in each place?
Yeah, that's actually a great analogy.
Right.
When we talk about the GDP gap, we have to consider things like purchasing power parity, or PPP for short.
Okay.
And that takes into account how much you can actually buy with your money in different countries.
Got it.
So while the euro has weakened against the dollar, it doesn't mean Europeans suddenly became poorer.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But even with those adjustments, there's still a productivity gap, right?
Yeah.
What's the report's take on that?
Well, one of the factors that the report points to is the just massive productivity growth of the U.S. tech sector, especially in Silicon Valley.
Right.
A quarter of all jobs in the U.S. are at tech companies that got their start with venture capital.
Yeah.
Compare that to the EU, where it's under 2%.
Wow. That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about all those giant U.S. tech companies like Google and Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
They were all heavily backed by venture capital early on.
Exactly. And that leads to this bigger question.
Yeah.
Can Europe replicate that model, or does it need to find its own unique path to boosting productivity?
Right.
The Draghi report, which focuses on European competitiveness, actually suggests that Europe needs to close the innovation gap, especially in advanced technologies, to keep pace with the U.S. and China.
No, speaking of innovation,
Yeah.
this report actually argues that Europe isn't lacking in that department at all.
Right.
What's fascinating is that Europe produces unicorns,
Oh.
those billion-dollar startups, at the same rate as the U.S. when you consider the amount of capital invested.
Right.
So it's not that European startups are less efficient.
Right.
It's more about the scale of investment.
Yeah, and that raises, I think, a very important question.
Yeah.
If Europe has the talent and the ideas, why hasn't it translated into the same level of global tech dominance as the U.S.?
That's what I'm wondering, too. Historically, Europe has been this hub for innovation.
Absolutely.
I mean, think about France's early lead in transistors or the UK's pioneering work in computing.
Yeah,
I mean, they were at the forefront of technology.
absolutely. And what happened? Well, the report suggests that part of the answer might lie in a historical focus on national champions,
Okay.
meaning large established companies often favored by governments.
Got it.
This combined with, I think, a certain aversion to risk-taking, especially in areas like semiconductors and software,
Right.
might have led to some missed opportunities.
So while the U.S. was going all in on new technologies, Europe was playing it safe.
Perhaps. And during those crucial early years of the tech boom,
Yeah.
that boldness really made a difference.
Yeah.
It allowed the U.S. to capitalize on things like the shale gas revolution, which had a significant impact on its economy.
Boy, isn't there like a new wave of European startups emerging?
Yeah.
Ones that are focused on areas like deep tech and sustainability?
Yeah.
Could that be Europe's chance to catch up?
That's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm intrigued. Stay with us as we uncover what this new wave of European innovation looks like.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about how Europe, despite some historical hurdles, is still very much in the innovation game.
Yeah.
But this report doesn't just paint like a rosy picture, right?
Right.
It also dives into what needs to change for Europe to really unlock its potential.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It lays out some pretty bold recommendations.
Okay.
Starting with a massive increase in strategic investment.
Okay.
It actually throws out a figure of 800 billion euros per year.
800 billion. That's a mind-boggling amount of money. Where's that even supposed to come from?
Well, the report suggests a 50-50 split between public and private sectors.
Okay.
When we look at the public side, the EU budget is key.
Right.
Right now, it's about 1% of the EU's total GDP,
Okay.
and only a fraction of that goes to innovation directly.
Okay. But is just throwing more money at the problem really the solution? It seems like there's more to it from that.
You hit the nail on the head. It's not about blindly increasing spending.
Right.
Strategic allocation is key.
Okay.
Take EU funding programs like Horizon Europe, for example.
Yeah.
They have the potential to support groundbreaking research, but their impact should be even greater.
Got it. So it's about making sure that the money is being used in the most effective way possible.
Right.
But what about the private sector? How do we get them more involved in funding European innovation?
That's where things get a little more complicated.
Okay.
Europe has a lot of wealth, but it's not always flowing to those high-growth tech companies that really need it.
Right.
One of the big roadblocks is the structure of European capital markets.
Yeah.
The report talks about this thing called the Capital Markets Union,
Yeah.
which is the EU's attempt to create a single market for capital.
Okay. For those of us who don't spend our days, thinking about finance, what does Capital Markets Union actually mean in practical terms?
Think of it like this. Imagine trying to drive across Europe.
Okay.
But each country has different road signs, speed limits, and even rules about which side of the road you drive on.
Yeah.
It would make the journey pretty chaotic, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of what it's like for investors in Europe right now.
Okay.
Each country has its own set of financial regulations,
Right.
tax systems, even bankruptcy laws.
So it's like trying to navigate a financial maze whenever you cross a border.
Exactly. And this fragmentation creates a lot of friction and uncertainty. Investors, especially those from outside the EU,
Yeah.
might think twice about putting their money into European startups
Right.
when things are so complex.
And it just seems so much easier to invest in the U.S. then.
Yeah, well, and it's not just the regulations, right?
Right.
I mean, you've probably heard this too, that European investors are sometimes seen as more cautious,
Yeah.
less willing to take risks compared to, say, American investors.
Right.
Is there any truth to that?
I don't know.
Well, European households tend to have high savings rates,
Okay.
but they often favor cash or low-risk investments rather than putting their money into the stock market or long-term growth opportunities.
So even if the money is there, it's not necessarily finding its way to the companies that need it to grow into those, European champions that we were talking about earlier.
That's exactly the
Yeah.
challenge.
Yeah.
The report even suggests that pension funds, which manage trillions of euros,
Wow.
could play a much bigger role in funding innovation.
Okay.
But their current allocation to venture capital is tiny.
So how do we convince those pension fund managers to embrace a bit more risk and see the potential in these startups?
There are some interesting initiatives popping up across Europe.
Okay.
In Germany, you have the TIBI initiative.
Okay.
The UK has the Mansion House proposals.
Okay.
Both are aimed at encouraging pension funds to consider investing in these kinds of high-growth companies.
Okay. Those sound promising.
Yeah.
So we need to simplify regulations,
Right.
unlock private capital,
Mm-hmm.
encourage a more risk-taking mindset.
Yeah.
What else does the report highlight as crucial for accelerating European innovation?
The report draws heavily from the Draghi report,
Okay.
which outlines this broader vision for European competitiveness.
Okay.
And it identifies 3 key areas for transformation:
Okay.
innovation and competitiveness,
Huh.
cheap and abundant clean energy,
Right.
and resilience and security.
Wow, that's ambitious. Sounds like Europe needs to level up on multiple fronts.
You're right, it's a multifaceted challenge. But it's important to remember that these transformations are all interconnected.
Okay.
Let's take clean energy, for instance.
Okay.
The European Commission estimates that it will take over 620 billion euros per year to achieve the Green Deal objectives.
That's another huge number.
Yeah.
But couldn't this also be a massive opportunity for Europe?
Absolutely.
Okay.
By becoming a leader in clean energy and sustainability, Europe can attract talent, attract investment, and create entirely new industries.
Right.
This strengthens its economic position and its geopolitical standing.
So it's like turning a challenge into a competitive advantage.
Precisely.
Right.
But it requires coordination both at national and EU levels.
It sounds like we're not just talking about like throwing money at startups.
Yeah.
It's about building an entire ecosystem for innovation to thrive.
You've got it.
Okay?
It involves investing in strategic areas like AI, defense, and essential infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And it also means tackling those structural barriers we discussed earlier.
So are we talking about like a massive top-down industrial policy like we've seen in the past?
Not necessarily. The Draghi report advocates for increased public investment. Yes.
Okay.
But it also emphasizes the importance of entrepreneurship
Okay.
and creating a more adaptable economy.
So it's about finding that balance, strategic direction from the top,
Mm-hmm.
but also fostering that bottom-up entrepreneurial spirit.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The report quotes several venture capitalists and entrepreneurs who emphasize the need for a hacker mentality
Right.
when tackling Europe's challenges.
Hacker mentality. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
What do they mean by that?
It's about shifting away from overly complex plans and bureaucratic processes and embracing a more experimental problem-solving approach.
Okay.
It's about empowering people to try new things,
Yeah.
fail fast, and learn quickly.
So it's like taking that Silicon Valley mindset,
Yeah.
but giving it a European flavor.
You could say that it's recognizing that innovation doesn't always happen in big corporations or government labs.
Right.
It often comes from those scrappy startups, the people who see a problem
Yeah.
and are determined to find a solution.
The people who aren't afraid to challenge the status quo and push the boundaries.
Exactly. And that's where I think Europe has a real opportunity.
Okay.
It has the talent, the ideas, the resources.
Mhm.
It just needs the right environment for that energy and creativity to flourish.
So Europe's future as a tech powerhouse isn't a foregone conclusion.
Right.
It's a choice.
A choice that requires bold action, strategic investment, and a willingness to embrace a new way of thinking.
Well said.
Yeah.
Before we get too carried away with all these like big ideas,
Yeah.
I'm curious about what tangible steps the report suggests to make this vision a reality.
Sure.
What actionable insights can we take away from this deep dive?
That's a perfect question to lead us into the final part of our exploration. Stay with us as we uncover the key takeaways and concrete actions that can truly help accelerate European innovation.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From debunking those Eurodoomer myths to exploring the potential of a new wave of European innovation.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's get down to brass tacks. What are the concrete takeaways from this report?
Yeah.
What can actually be done to accelerate Europe's rise as a tech powerhouse?
Well, the report goes beyond just identifying the problems.
Yeah.
You know, it offers some really practical solutions.
Yeah.
One that jumped out at me is the idea of leveraging Europe's just massive IT spending.
Okay.
Did you know that European corporations and governments spend a staggering 2 trillion euros annually on IT?
2 trillion. That's an astronomical figure.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing most of that money isn't going to European companies.
You're absolutely right. A significant chunk of that spending ends up with U.S. tech giants.
Right.
What the report suggests is that even diverting a small fraction of that money towards European startups and scale-ups
Okay.
could have a transformative impact on the entire ecosystem.
So it's like a built-in market that's just waiting to be tapped.
Exactly.
It makes sense when you think about it. European companies and governments have a vested interest in seeing a strong European tech sector.
Right.
It would mean a stronger economy, more jobs, and greater competitiveness on a global stage.
Precisely. It's a win-win situation.
Yeah.
But I know what you're thinking.
What's it?
Getting large organizations to change their procurement habits
Yeah.
is a tall order. It takes time and effort.
It's not like flipping a switch, that's for sure.
Right.
But the report does point to some encouraging examples of public procurement programs that have successfully supported innovative companies.
Yeah.
And I imagine as the European tech scene matures and produces more competitive solutions, those purchasing decisions will become easier to justify.
That's the key. It's about creating a positive feedback loop.
Right?
Supporting European companies so they can grow and become even more attractive to buyers in both the public and private sectors.
It's like planting a seed and nurturing it until it blossoms into something remarkable.
Yeah.
I like that analogy.
Okay, so we have this idea of redirecting a portion of that massive IT spending towards European companies. What other actionable insights does the report offer?
Well, it stresses the importance of focusing on key strategic areas.
Okay.
It calls for a pan-European approach,
Right.
breaking down those internal barriers we talked about,
Yeah.
and prioritizing sectors where Europe has a real chance to lead.
So where should Europe be placing its bets? What sectors have the most potential?
The report specifically mentions AI, defense, and energy as critically important areas.
These are all areas with huge global implications. It makes sense for Europe to try and carve out a leadership position.
Absolutely.
But we're not exactly starting from scratch here. There are already established players in these fields, both inside and outside the EU.
That's true, but there's also a lot of room for innovation and disruption.
Right.
Think about AI, for example.
Okay.
Europe has a strong research foundation and a wealth of talent.
Right.
What it needs is to translate that research into commercially viable products and services. So it's about bridging the gap between academia and industry,
Yeah.
creating a more vibrant startup ecosystem that can turn those cutting-edge ideas into real-world solutions.
Exactly. And that's where those funding gaps we discussed earlier come back into play.
Right.
Europe needs to do more to support startups as they scale up, helping them reach that level where they can compete on a global stage.
It's about cultivating those European champions that can stand toe-to-toe with the best in the world.
Right. And in areas like defense and energy, there's a strong case to be made for a more coordinated EU-wide approach.
Okay.
Imagine joint research programs, shared procurement initiatives, a more unified regulatory framework. By leveraging the collective strength of the EU, Europe can compete more effectively with larger global players.
So it's about thinking bigger, acting bolder, and collaborating more effectively.
You've got it. It's about recognizing that in today's interconnected world, going it alone isn't a winning strategy.
Right.
Europe needs to act as a united force to reach its full potential.
Well said.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up this deep dive?
You know, this report really got me thinking. What role can each of us play in supporting the growth of European innovation?
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the big picture, but individual actions can make a difference.
Okay.
Supporting a local startup, advocating for policies that encourage investment and innovation, even just talking about the exciting things happening in the European tech scene, we can all contribute to a brighter future.
So what does this all mean for you, our listeners? We've explored the complexities of European innovation, the historical context, the roadblocks, the vast potential. But this isn't just an intellectual exercise. This is about shaping the future. Europe has the ingredients for success, the talent, the ideas, the resources, but it needs a spark to ignite that potential. That spark can come from bold leadership, strategic investment, and a collective embrace of a more innovative and entrepreneurial spirit. The future of European innovation is being written right now. The question is, will we be passive observers or active participants in shaping that future?
You know, I'm optimistic about what the future holds. There's a real sense of energy and excitement in the European tech scene. I'm eager to see what unfolds in the years to come.
Me too. And that wraps up our deep dive into European innovation. We hope you found this exploration as insightful and thought-provoking as we did. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and stay curious.